Hi, good morning, Adedayo Agarau. That's how he pronounced it then. Welcome to the book replay. Thank you so much for heeding our call because I've been chasing you and Troy for like 2 months now. I said that if you guys don't
Oh,
respond by the end of June, I was going to start subtweeting and doing emotional blackmail because that's like my last. But first, how are you? And where are you now? You mentioned that you're in California. All this time I thought you were in Iowa.
yeah, so I'm fine. No, the weather feels like Ibadan. So it's bright and sunny
Mm.
outside. If I take walks, I'll see people almost naked because they're enjoying the sun. And me too, I'll join them because I'll just sit down with my bare chest outside in the sun. I left Iowa, I think it was 2023 after my master's. I moved
Mm.
to California, to Stanford to do the Stegner Fellowship for 2 years. I finished that last year, and I've been in California since then. I've gone to LA, but now I'm back in San Jose.
It's early everything that they say it is because they are like that's the center of the universe.
Yeah, that's the end of the world. Actually, it's just very dystopian out there, and you'll be like, yeah, if the world was to end, I think it's going to end in this early.
We did lose contact. I think after the Facebook days. I don't know what happened that everybody departed from Facebook. I keep was it is it the rise of Twitter? Well, I know everybody just disappeared from
Nah,
Facebook for a bit, and then for like 9 years we've been picking everybody. So I've always wondered like what
that
has been happening. That was 2017.
I think what happened then was that people started to realize that the community on Facebook wasn't exactly helping them grow internationally because it seems like we're like in a very small village where everybody knows everybody and everybody's like hyping everybody's work up. Oh, this guy is brilliant. So this guy is, but our work just was like nested inside that small community and it's so hard to break
Mm.
out of it. And then Twitter, because of the way it's set up, it offered like an opportunity to actually like, put your work out and then engage with a larger world. So for Facebook, people have to be your friend to see what you are writing, or you have
Yeah.
to know a friend of a friend. On Twitter, it's like if I scream out loud, who knows?
I'm sorry.
Maybe somebody in the US can see my tweet and like say, "Oh, yeah, I know this person," and I think that actually contributed to the growth of a lot of writers, especially people who are like looking to connect with people and all of that. I connected with a lot of people, so we started like breaking out of the Facebook spell and old, and before you know it just felt like why are people on Facebook? you know? So yeah, I think that's it.
Usually I call like the time I spend away from like people I used to like see on Facebook till now that there are some of everyone is sort of like more stable and they are popping up. I call it the lost years.
Right.
So if you could inform us what happened in these lost years. So I think that's like 2018 till 2025.
For me to talk about 2018 till now, I have to talk about 2011 to 2018. I don't know, for some reason, I didn't get into OAU in 2011. And because of that, my dad was like so angry and was like, you know what, you're just going to leave this house. So the only form that was open then was a pre-ND form, not even like a pre-degree. It's pre-ND. I felt like it was so beneath me that
Yeah.
I can't believe this. However, my dad needed me to leave the house just because I was already playing football everywhere. I got the form, I got into the program. I started the program in Ede, Osho State. So I was in Ede between 2011 and 2015. Those were like the time where I started writing seriously. I started like, finding my feet as a writer. And then 2015, I went to Ogun State Hospital in Ijebu-Ode, where I was like, being a student nutritionist blah, 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 blah. I started my HND later in Ondo State. And I finished my program in 2019. I went to service in 2019. So between 2018 and 2019, I was still in Ondo State. Now, in 2019, yeah, I got a job at the Nigerian Eagle Flower in Ibadan. So I was working there. I applied for my first MFA. I only applied to one school, I think Texas State University. And I got into the program, luckily for me. However, they had a problem with the fact that they didn't understand if HND was the same as DSC. So I had to let go of the admission. And I'm glad that that didn't work for me, actually, because it then gave me time to prepare for another application season. So I applied to like 5 schools, and luckily for me, I got into all the 5 schools. Iowa was literally on the list. I just like, Iowa comes calling, you just say yes. So I said yes to Iowa, and then I left Nigeria in 2021. After my master's, I moved to California to start my fellowship, which was at Stanford, which is literally, I think, the best program I've ever gone to. The Stegner Fellowship. It's so good. It's life changing, to be honest. I tried to start a PhD program, which after a few months, I was like, you know what? Pack your bag. Yeah. So I packed my bag. It feels like I've only talked about going to school, right? I've been going to school since all my life. I've only gone to school.
Mm.
So at some point I was like, you know what? I'm actually really tired of this circle of, I don't know if it's chasing knowledge or trying to like outdo myself. I need to catch my breath. I need to do some work outside of writing while still writing. So yeah, that's largely it.
Thank you so much for sharing because do some
Yeah.
work outside of writing because you are doing a lot of work outside writing. Because I think when you published that, 1,000 reasons to, I was like, what? Wait, what? Is he a computer scientist? Like, is he learning to code? Right. And then there's where you're tracking the corruption index. I think you were working with Archivy on that. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? We are documenting Nigeria's, excesses. In my head, I was like, okay, aside writing, and then you mentioned nutritionist. I'm like, what are the other worlds that you're part of that I do not yet know personally?
I was a nutritionist. I studied human nutrition and dietetics, which was my first degree largely. For some reason, my favorite professor, Yetunde Akeke, actually used to like think that, oh, I'm just gonna be this very brilliant dietitian. We're friends now, and she's like, yeah, you know what? I see it now. You were never meant for that word. Yeah, I think that I'm the kind of person who have like a lot of interests by the virtue of being Nigerian that you really just cannot bank on doing one thing. And writing came to me at the time when I was still finding myself. Honestly, writing has been the only thing that clicked, that stayed with me, really. I don't think I know how to do any other thing very well as much as I know how to do writing, as I enjoy doing writing. After I left Eagle Flour Mill, I got my first job working in Lagos as a content designer, well, more like content operator. So if you use an Infinix phone or all of the techno Infinix and Tencent products that comes into Africa, there's this browser that comes with those phones. It's called the Phoenix browser. I joined the Nigerian team in Lagos for content operations. So all of the content and videos and push notifications that go on the app and all of that was my work. So I was like designing content for engagement on the app. And then after that, I they moved me from the Nigerian team to lead like Southern African team. So all in 1 year. So I worked there between 2020 August, I think, my service year, till 2021 or July when I left Nigeria. And then I worked at a startup after I left Nigeria. It's called Skillex. Skillex is a crypto company, and I was leading their content team, did the content design for the mobile app. After my MFA, after Iowa, I joined Google, and I was working at Google while I was going to Stanford. And then I joined Uber. And then after Uber, I'm now at PayPal.
Oh, that explains a lot. So this resume is very rich because you have like the Fortune 500 companies in tech there. Like if you don't even need to introduce yourself as like I wrote a poetry book. Even though to me I think that's the coolest thing ever.
I decided to share that, but it's never like what I lead with. I was part of like the first couple of content designers that started working in AI, and started working on AI products. So
Hmm.
um, I don't know if you use Google now and you want to like search something, you get the AI
Yeah. Yeah.
summary.
Yeah.
That literally was the first product I worked on. I was on the team that was thinking of the ways with which we can actually like introduce the AI experience into Google search. So it was really cool. So, but we do all of these things, and then you get home at night, you're too tired, and you're just laying in bed, and what comes to you is like a line of a poem or the story that you read from your friend. It just reminds you that regardless of your pursuit for whatever it is that actually sustains you, what is still very important is that your soul needs to be fed. So reading a book, and by the virtue of reading a book, writing. But virtue of writing, I'm thinking of a different book that I read that said something. So it's like a
Mm.
loop, really. It's everything is like just nested into one another. So you really cannot escape your fate as a writer because if you try to, it would haunt you, really.
I can attest to that. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
attest to that. If you write,
yeah,
you can't escape it. I think I read this line that stayed with me that said,
yeah.
if you don't write your novel, you don't write your book, you are bound to see it everywhere. A book is written. Now that gives a lot of context to how active you are on Twitter, because like, hey, you're always on my timeline. There's always somebody to be taught. There's always an idea to be expressed. But you're not just generating content. It has always been useful. It has always been purposeful. And it comes with like this viciousness that I always wonder where it's going from, especially when you're talking about like the country and its problems. So when I read Years of Blood, I was like, oh boy, oh wow. But the first question in my head then was that, you are not afraid. It's a statement, actually. It's not a question, but it's like, you are not afraid.
So I'm going to tell you a story. The first poem I wrote
Okay.
in the book, The Years of Blood, is now the second poem in the book. The poem is called Ibadan. And
That's the one that starts with, every weed grows is a wild mouth
yeah,
eating children. Kai,
yes.
kai,
So,
kai.
so that poem, I wrote that poem on the flight out of Nigeria. Now, my childhood has always been my childhood. For Boys Who Went was my first attempt at trying to tell a story I wasn't ready to tell. Although I wasn't even conscious of the fact that I was trying to tell that story. I've always had this childhood. It's always been very dark, very sad. But it felt like as I continued to grow up, my body was keeping that memory away from me. I just could not engage with it, or I never sat with it. There's this concept of the head, that the idea that the head is the seat of the soul's own God. In the way that the head actually sort of like protects you when tragedy happens. People literally go, you know, and by the virtue of that, it's a response to holding your head and thanking your head. The first poem I wrote in this book was that poem that actually literally like just tries to like map my entire childhood in relationship to ritual killings. And I did not think of writing this book. I didn't write anything regarding this like that is as legible as this until my body felt like you're safe. Now it's time. What would have happened if I tried to like write this book in Nigeria as somebody who's living in Nigeria? These are like the questions that I'm asking myself. So honestly, I am in a different place now. I'm writing from a different world. It's a little bit more civilized. So if for things that happen, there are repercussions. As long as I've not broken any law and I'm not about to break a law, you know what? Let's go. that's
Hmm.
that's so because I know that the law is literally like something that guides the society here. So because of
Mhm.
that, it's just easy for me to like express myself, say exactly what I think is the right thing to say. Of course, I mean I feel like I'm very opinionated regarding politics and all of that, but it's how I feel. If you live in this country, you would love where you're coming from a lot. That you begin to like point out that this is really terrible. This should not happen. So yeah.
Yeah. I get that sentiment. I get that sentiment. Thank you so much for sharing. Because yeah, the concept of your body being safe enough to express these things that it had stored up. Because I mean, if you stay in Nigeria, it's abuse upon abuse upon abuse most of the time. Pulling back away from that from a little bit, you mentioned like Ibadan being like the first poem you wrote, and I've
Mhm.
always been curious as to how like a poetry collection is assembled. I think for prose, I know that is when you get to your second draft and you start crying. But for poetry, how does that get assembled? You just like write like a bunch of poems and then you pull them out, or do you sit down and then the genie blesses you with poems and then you write, or is it not experiential? How like do
Um,
you normally like assemble a collection?
I'm a different writer now, and and that is very important to the question because maybe in 2017 or 2016 when I was writing for Boys Who Went, I would have just written poems, whether they're like very intimate or they're more legible. By intimate, I mean poems that now only Miss Abiwati they write for there. And I think that I did that like in the middle of the book. I really like just decided that, this is just gonna be me and my obsessions and my own dreams and all of that. So
Mm,
the middle part of the book actually feels like fever dream. And I know that it would technically push people out, but they mean so much to me. Those fever dreams.
mm,
I write my book of poems as though I am writing a novel, really, so that people are able to hold fast into like a coherent storytelling. The Years of Blood is following a single child who has like many friends who are dead now, and then he borrows voices from other people too, voices from his friends, voices from people who he do not know their names. This child is also telling of his own escape from kidnapping. Is But this child does not have like the infinite memory. Is not able to remember everything. So sometimes this child actually uses the word like I think. There's this bizarre innocence in the way that the work is actually working in such a way that the poet does not assume that he literally is the author and creator of these experiences. The poet is also admitting at several junctions that he this thing happened, this thing was real. However, I do not remember. However, I think. However, yes, this, but I am not sure. And that is in some way a good way to tell a story where, especially if you're like, witnessing not just for yourself, but you're witnessing for your community. So, in what way is this woman whose children are now kidnapped and then their bodies are found, grieving even in her own room? The poet is not there. So, how would this woman or this singular woman actually like grieve? In the first poem I said a father of four intact bodies could be giggling under his breath, whispering to his friend that we're alone yalo yi, which means she's running mad. And that is very important because I think that patriarchy in some way actually sort of like also has its own very distinctive way of witnessing, in such a way that the first thing that comes to witnessing under the patriarchal lens is that it first understands the gender difference. Because of that, the way that women actually grieve is different from the way that men grieve. This kind of grieving does not really fit into the way a man actually grieves. The next thing that comes to them is that these women are operating on a node that is like very close to madness. So, and
mm,
as a man, I am very acutely aware of this myself. So I feel like it then centers not just the people who are witnessing this grieving, but it also centers like the way our society actually sort of like works and all of that. So, and at many points in this book, I am sort of like introducing notes in which we witness, although very silently, notes in which how does a boy who grew up with this bunch of boys, in fact, actually like as a child miss his friends. It's just an acutely aware book where I'm trying to, as much as possible, show that, see, I am human. I experienced this happened. This is how I saw it. So, yeah.
Oh no, see, the Years of Blood, because I read it complete first time just to like get like a feel of the language, see the words, beautiful writing. It's not just something that I enjoyed reading, but I also enjoyed saying it out. So for the second time when I was trying to look at the poems more closely, I just went through like 10 poems, and that's where I picked like a lot of my questions from. I liked the language because for some reason I was, maybe because there were a lot of like Yoruba tonal marks there. Maybe I was thinking of like the fact that the English was broken in such a way that it was cut into Yoruba tonalities. I don't know if I'm reading that correctly. There were hardly any long running sentences except for some poems, but you had like one, two, three, four, five, then there is a comma, one, two, three, then you break. If it's a long sentence, you break the line off. I liked that form. It was very musical. And then I've always been a fan of your writing right from Facebook, because I think your poetry was one of the first poetries. Whenever I read through your poems, I was like, yeah, this guy has a way with what? He has a way with storytelling. Have you ever written a story before? Did you ever write prose?
My agent would like this question. A whole lot. I've tried and they've not been very successful. My attempts have not been really successful. My agent believes that I just need to actually catch my breath and sit down and write. In 2022, I wrote a flash fiction that actually it was my first flash fiction, and then it made the best of small fiction in America. But since then, I've not published any fiction because I've not gotten to the point where I feel like I'm confident enough with my own fiction. I'm always trying my hands at stories. I have like a couple drafts here and there that I still need to revisit. I am also writing a novel, which is very interesting because I think I tweeted about this. My father's shadow is literally like tracing similar story as me. And I was like, I hope they will not think that way I plagiarize like this because technically that's it. That's my relationship with fiction. I think fiction is really hard to pull off. It's a very jealous genre. It wants its own time and attention, and I'm like, I have to live my life. I need to go and drink with friends. I don't have time to do this. So yeah, I've always thought in stories. I think that's a good place to land. I know how to think of a story coming alive. I just have not had the time or the patience to put the words together to make the story as coherent into fiction.
I mean, I can vibe with that, but your agent is really onto something. If they can see this, yeah, please push him to write that story. Yeah, because like
Yeah.
in the Years of Blood, there's what's one of the things that was recurring there that I really vibe with that I hadn't found anywhere was I don't want to say the measure of boyhood. Like it's a story of
Mhm,
boyhood, but I found
mhm.
it in very, very
Yeah.
wonderful measures. And it felt as if I had never really considered myself as a boy before. And the stories of boys being boys, I've not read personally a lot of it in prose, especially when it comes to like the Nigerian African experience, especially that specific experience in Felele. About Felele in school, I had a roommate who will gather all the boys from Felele too, and then they'll sit down, they'll talk about Felele from morning till evening. And I was always like at my corner, like, what is about this Felele that they like? And then they'll be like, oh, I love that place. It can be anyhow, but it has its own character. And then they'll convene the next week, like Friday, Saturday, and they'll still be talking about Felele. Anyway, all of them are
Yeah.
abroad now, so I'm not going to hear about Felele again. But when I saw that in your book, I was like, okay, now this is my opportunity to ask finally, what
Yeah.
is Felele like in Ibadan? Like, what is the area like?
I didn't live in Finland myself, right? But I had friends there. So I spent
Oh,
like some time there. I don't know how to describe this place because truly it has its own character now that I'm thinking about it. I live about 5, 6 kilometers away from Felele. So I would walk from College Crescent to go and play ball and watch film with my friends in Felele. However, there are several houses in Felele where you would know that if I enter this house, what's inside it? Because the walls are tall, the gates are like tall. And then the place is really silent and serene. However, you would also know that people are there because children just come out from anywhere, rich or broke. Everybody just there. There's like this field where all of us, you just know Boti child playing football because they just like flap like turkey.
mm.
You just know. So I think that it's actually like a very key part of my childhood because I come from a working class background, but maybe like a little nudge better than the typical working class because my parents could, afford to eventually between SS1 to SS3 send me to Scotts College, which is literally like just like half a kilometer away from Felele. So I would sneak away from school and go and play game. So I would imagine myself as being lucky enough to attend a private school. However, I spent my first couple of years in secondary school at Ibadan Boys High School, which is like one of the most notorious boys only schools. So I think you would see how my childhood was really nested around boys at every spare. Like one of the friends that lived in Fairleigh was attending my church, so we attended the same church together. My entire childhood just circled around boys and boys. Even when we do some other things that involved the other gender, it still centers like the boy child. So we cried together, we grew up
Mm.
together, we laughed together, we ate together, we played soccer together. So it's just there's no way I would think about my childhood as a boy that I would not like, mention places like Okeado, like College Crescent, like Amfani, like Ring Road, like Liberty Road, and then Felele. All of those places are like if there's like
Ooh.
the body eats map, like you would just see say just day green, like boo, 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 boo. Because I did there a lot growing up.
Outside of Jos, if there's anywhere I'll stay in Nigeria, it would
It
actually
will be
be
Felele.
Ibadan. Well, well, I would like it to be
Yeah.
fair because I've heard so much about the place. Oh,
Yeah,
has it been
there's that
gentrified?
too. I mean, Fela has always been gentrified, but it's just
Hmm.
now it's not the Fela that we used to know anymore. Fela is no longer silent, so maybe it's a good
Hmm.
thing. I drove through it recently. Last time I
Hmm.
was in Nigeria in 2024. Yeah, just for the sake of it, actually. Like I just drove through Felele, went for a massage, and I picked the one at Felele. So they're buying out places now. Like rich people are buying out houses there. Like they're buying people out of Felele. There's this other side of Felele that now people are like moving into like rented apartments, rented places, which meant that families are now
Hmm.
springing up, like a new crop of families that are not living in the high-rise buildings, now feeling more like a balanced community rather than, oh, these are rich children, and then this is we, us, the Mekuno, that kind of thing. So
So I think with this gist of Felele, I believe that we have to start setting for the novel.
you or me?
All of this is for
Oh,
you.
oh, wait, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Talking about your poetry collection, The Years of Blood, is really centered in that place. Like Ibadan is bleeding from
Yep,
every
yep.
aspect of it. It even made me fall in love with the town. But then again, I was also able to witness some of the darkness. A lot of the stories there I
Mm.
recognize as things that happen across the country. But my first question will be, so for the poems in this collection, like how many years did it take for you to like complete everything? Because I know you poets are like, oh, there's just one poem that will just make this collection fly, and then we have to wait for another 3 years.
So I was writing two books concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
The Years of Blood and the Birds Died. The Morning Birds Died is supposed to come out next year, but I finally like written to my publishers to say 2029, please, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so
Uh-huh.
so now, but The Years of Blood was I wouldn't publish this book if I hadn't if I hadn't finished it in Iowa, or if I had not like finished the first draft in Iowa. I was writing The Money Best Died as what should be my thesis, and then I was writing The Years of Blood as a lifelong project. Just one day, I think it was after I wrote this poem. What's it called? I think it was after Springfield, where I was talking about my dad. That I was like, you know what? I think it's important for this book to be my thesis. So the first version of the book was called The Year of Blood. It was just like I was folding every single experience into like a single year. And I was really strong. I really believed that it should be the Year of Blood until when I started the editorial process, which was after 2023, when I joined Stanford. So I wrote the book between 2021, the first draft between 2021 and 2023. But in 2023, I submitted it for like a couple of prizes. In 2023, I met with who would now be my mentor, Remika Bingham Risha. And Remika was like, hey, Dad, this book is strong. You should spend so much more time writing The Morning the Birds Died, but you see this book, it needs to go out. So I was like, oh, sure. And then she was like, you know what? You still need to write more poems. So we worked like literally meeting every other week. And then we're like, just like reading back and forth. She was like helping me thinking, we're talking about rearranging the book and all of that. So that process went through 2023 September. The book was ready. I submitted this book for the Poetic Justice Institute Prize, which it eventually won in September. And by November, I got a call that they're not done reading, but they just want me to know that yes, this book, the editors have decided to choose it. The entire process of the book started in 2021 on my flight to the US. I didn't, of course, would not stop writing the book until I sent it finally, I think later in 2024. So I spent about 3 years on this book, honestly. I feel like if I had like spent more time, I probably would have like, kept this book in an archive somewhere. Just like, you know what, maybe this is going to be the last book I publish in my career. But I'm glad that it's the first book that came out. So
The thing about a good book is that first or last, it's always going to have its place. How did this process change you? Because for the intensity in this book, which we'll get into in a moment, I can't imagine. You must have been transformed. In what ways were you transformed?
well, I started walking, taking long ass walks, like 3, 4 miles after, specifically after it has snowed. So I'm just like, yeah, like I need to catch my breath. I need like just I need the cold to actually like freeze my face. I need to feel, yeah. Iowa was a difficult time, especially like for the weather. But the weather eventually became a blessing because it was the only way that I it was the only way that I could scream without opening my mouth. I took very long walks. Once I see it snowing, oh God, glory to Jesus, finally, hallelujah. I
So
just keyed
sorry.
up where, no, it's fine. It's okay. Adams and I laugh about this a lot. I just keyed up where my shoe, my boogie boogie, and just hit the road and I just keep walking. There was this day that I think I was heading home and then I had packed, it was in my first year, I had packed my car. So I didn't have any of those khaki that I used to wear. Of course, not khaki, but I didn't have any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered how what the cold did to me. And like I was so cold. My hands were like it felt like blood stopped flowing from my body or in my body that I started like crying and I was just struggling to walk. Like by the time I got home, I just when you open hot water on ice block, I felt like my body was just like that single experience was involuntary. It wasn't like I intended to be cold, but there are
Mm-hmm.
times when I intended to just feel that. And then I just took all of those long walks. There are times when I would like be lost and then my phone is like almost dead and I'm just like finding my way. So I took very long walks. And that's like, I feel is like the way that I could cope with a very strange landscape and writing a very strange story in a very strange landscape.
Mm.
It felt like taking these poems to workshop it felt like trauma dumping on people, you know, and I care so much about how people feel. I don't. You can dump your trauma on me, but I don't think you will get me. I'll get your own because we speak the same language, but I don't think we speak the same language. Like I speak Yoruba, but we both speak English. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that I'm now here. You've never been there, so you probably would. And I
Yeah.
think that I always go back to the fact that the things that happened in the Years of Blood are things that people write, Americans mostly, or the Western writers actually write as speculative fiction. Nothing about the Years of Blood is speculative. We lived this experience, so having to like explain all of these things as theories that are like lived experiences is was not something that I had the time or the patience for. Yeah, Adams is my friend. And when we were lucky to be in Iowa together at the time, we would sit down, we would just cook, just start doing therapy. Like not like we're intentionally doing therapy. We're just in Iowa.
I tell you. I tell you, nah, it's
We,
difficult. It
we,
gets difficult.
we just talk before you know it, someone yeah, you go like take away. Maybe you need more. So I'm grateful for the community that was in Iowa at the time when I was there. Honestly, I'm still finding out how being in America generally has changed me. But I know that
Mm.
I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm now trying to center myself. Think that I'm intentionally trying to catch my breath. I still don't know. I don't know what that means or what it looks like. At least the first step is that I've taken a break from the PhD program, writing this book, living in America, testing racism since 2021. I don't know how all of that has changed me yet, but I guess we'll figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you so much. Yeah, I
yeah,
can only imagine. I can only imagine from
yeah,
all I've heard. Thank you. Into this very intense book called Years of Blood. I have a theory that, our fiction has sort of like reached a point where we are like, okay, we figured this thing out. And it's time for us to like bring back our poetry, wake that arm up because there is a lot that poetry can do. There's a lot it did for me while just reading the Years of Blood. I'm going to start with the first poem, which is Wind. Um, I will read it out because I think your writing is beautiful. So, of course, I'm going to read it out. Um, it could be me whose blood is crying, a pestle pounding is calling a mortar. It could be my father who's not coming home tonight, or sister who is raped, her breast sliced clean, her pubic hair shaved, her body dumped in a bush near Liberty Stadium. It could be my mother's headless body we gather around in the morning. Somewhere, a mother is throwing herself into the ground in someone's house. She's screaming, Oro! The darts of pain bull's eyeing her heart. It could be my ghost finding the touch of its mother in a house where the doors are shutting against portals of grief. Now I'm going to stop there. I have goosebumps already. I think strong is one word that has been used for this book, and it runs through. You waste no time introducing us to the subject of the matter. I mean, like once I just get to it could be my sister, that line. I almost did not want to read it, but I was like, if that's going to be the first poem, there's no reason why I shouldn't put it on the internet and say, okay, this is what you're getting into it. Because I received this as things that happened in Nigeria. And one of the things I realized was that we are very desensitized already to the things that are happening in the country. That it feels like this is the only language that can get the reaction that we could get because there's pounding bone. There's a mother pounding bone inside. What informed this language? I take it as that, you wanted to wake us up. As far as I'm concerned, that's it. This language wakes up the Nigerian spirit. Is this how you felt?
Coming from the 2020 Facebook years, I've always been somebody whose language has been very musical and then lyrical, and then my poetry heavily relies on metaphor. But as you grow older, as you become like the poets that you want to be, you just realize that there are certain subjects that do not require flowers, as people would call it, especially like certain subjects like as this one. I mean, there you will still find a way to actually like include flowers and music and all of that. However, what needs to be spelt out needs to be spelt out. The only reason why certain like other writers who are not like Africans would use very literal language in their writing is just because that's the only way they can actually like express what they're trying to say without
Mm,
confusing the reader rather. The Years of Blood for me was a book that I intentionally curated the language in. I intentionally like knew what I was going for. And this was very important for me to do by adding the wind as the first poem of the book because there's this part of the book that actually like literally has this very small snippet that tells
oh,
what the book is trying to do and exactly what it needs to do. And then it gives like a small backstory of like in 3 lines, this is what I'm about to write about. So if you read that and then you land on wind and you read wind, it is going to be your choice to continue to read the book.
true.
It's not a book that requires me to like doll up language just so that it's palatable for you. No, this is not a palatable subject.
Oh,
This is people's lives. This is my childhood. This is me. This is every other Nigerian child that has a missing brother or something. So it's a book that is doing serious work in the same way that people would say books about black emancipation is doing serious work. Yes, this is Nigerian emancipation too. So I think that's it for me. So people whose language are considered strong as black writers should be able to ingest books that write about death in this way. And this is not a palatable way to die. It's not a sweet way to die at all.
first, there's this motif that you build, like most of the poems around pounding bone, which
Mhm.
it's I found it very brilliant because first Pounding bone is sort of like an aberration. Like, what are you pounding bone for? You don't pound bone unless maybe,
Mm,
even if you're going to like crush bone, you need a machine, you need something more that you have
right.
to dry it. There's a whole lot of this. So, pounding bone first is something that doesn't even work. And then, two, bone is kind of like the structural, what builds the human being. And then, if you're going to pound bone, you need a pestle, essentially, is wood. Wood is structural to the plant, and you have like the
Mm,
breakdown of structure on both ends. I thought that mirrored the entire Nigerian experience from the 1990s down. In fact, before
yeah,
then,
man.
but mirroring it down and everything. The two strongest materials of any living system have been, they are also sort of like fighting against each other. It was
Right.
just like such a beautiful motif. And the relationship between wood and bone, like where does that come from? Is it something in Yoruba, or it was just really felt right and you brought it in? Because I found it really, really good.
Very interesting question. I've never really thought about that, but now that we can definitely go that route. So the idea of pounding in itself is metaphorical, but also it's real because technically, I don't know if you've followed stories of younger people who are trying to do money rituals. And then they are like doing the
Uh,
self process. Like they're doing this process by themselves. 2021 or 2020, there's like this story of three friends who killed one one of their girlfriends. Like the three friends decided that it was that one girl that they would kill. Then they killed her. They cut off her head. And then they literally cooked it. And then they pounded it. I think the idea of pounding in itself is very it comes from a place of disintegration. You're supposed to break something down. So whether pounds it to dust would not be what we're concerned about. It is the action. And I think that before you would decide to pound, it comes from a place of conviction that this thing is going to work. You have used somebody for ritual. They are grieving the people that you're using for ritual. So it's like there's that constant process of pounding. Because you pounded somebody's skull, you now have money or you have whatever it is that you have now, does not make the pounding stop because literally their access is now a pounding for other people. So yeah, it's like ringing in their head is a different way,
oh,
it's a different kind of pounding, but yes,
their
it
heads are
is
literally
pounding.
pounding in grief. I need to take a moment because there's
It's
a
fine.
there's a lot.
I'm just gonna drink. I'm just gonna drink my Pepsi. Pepsi, if you find this, I'm an ambassador. So find me.
I so what happened? Because we have like, in the midst of all of this pounding, in the midst of all of these missing people, in the midst of finding bodies in trash, bodies and people missing people seeing their loved ones in the most disagreeable state they could ever see them. There's still a childhood. There's still a childhood still going on concurrently. Like, what stories, what was happening at the time that this book was set in? Like, and of course, this is Ibadan, this is Nigeria. What was happening
Right.
around this time? It's like a little bit of
But
Nigerian's history that we almost
yeah,
never get to
yeah, yeah.
talk about.
So it's very interesting because I tried to remove Nigerian history from this and just try to like just base the book on just the events. However, it's so hard to not see it if you read the book because I was born in 1994 and I was born in a one bed apartment on Ogunle Street, very close to off Liberty Road, adjacent Liberty Stadium, Ibadan. Liberty Stadium is now called Obafemi Awolowo Stadium. Now, very interesting because the name would now be relevant because there was an annulment of the
It's
MK
during Nigeria
Abiola
elections, yeah.
1993 elections. MK Abiola, at that time, MK was already in prison. My grandfather died in 1995. My grandfather was a brilliant ghost writer for top top Yoruba musicians in the
Hmm.
1980s, 1970s. He was literally like writing all of their like most of their albums. But
Hmm.
he died in 1995. I crawled into an electric panel in 1990, I think 1995, and I was electrocuted. I almost died. I didn't die. My childhood started really rough, which meant that I spent so much time at home, which meant that
Hmm.
at several times, my education was stopped just because I needed to like take about 5 months out of school just to, go through the process of fixing my hand again, my left hand actually. Like it
Mm.
was really, really terrible. And I had ruler in my hand throughout my childhood, ruler and bandage, and then I had my hand like that. In 1998, because they had established that they were going to return, we were going to return to democracy. And at that
Democracy.
time, international forces were already acting on who they want to choose or who they would think would work with them towards this and all of that. So because of that, there was also like a different army of want to be politicians who were not exactly chosen but needed power. So two things were
Mm.
happening at the same time. People needed money for campaign, and people needed money, and then people needed access to power. So now the body in itself is a spiritual element. Now, let us go back to the Bible. The first story that caught my eye was the story of Abel and Cain. One of the biggest questions that I ask is why was Cain's sacrifice not accepted? It wasn't like he brought, the Bible did not say he brought the worst of his fruits. The only problem was that what he brought did not exactly bear blood. Eventually, when Jesus came, the Bible said that the blood of Jesus speaks better things than the blood of Abel, which means that blood literally speaks. Which meant that irrespective of whatever gods that you sort of like, run toward, there is an understanding that anything that actually bears blood speaks better things than things that do not. And then
Hmm.
there's hierarchy in the way that blood is actually recognized. So when Cain actually killed his brother Abel, because Abel actually offered God blood offering, goats, he committed a greater sacrifice of spilling his brother's blood. So that in itself is the first introduction to human sacrifices, I would argue.
Hmm.
Because if you then look at it towards like as the story actually continued to unfold, God himself actually commanded Abraham to take his son Isaac to the mountain to actually go offer him. So which meant that I would was he trying to ask for blood for Abraham's long life, or needed to bless him for money, or or he needed to give him affluence, because eventually he would say that Abraham is the father of the world. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to piece things together. The idea of spilling blood has always been in question, but it was never really complete until God had to send his own son to make
Hmm.
the entire circles complete. Like there needed
Hmm.
to be a human sacrifice that is
Hmm.
acceptable, that then redeems everybody. So what then is about blood that literally like makes things happen? And that is, I think, a century old mystery that we're all still trying to solve. That I think that whether it's Yoruba or Igbo or Hausa, like our own small gods have actually sort of found a way to have answers to. Which is why when people ask me questions about, do you believe in ritual killings? I'm like, are people killed because for the purpose of ritualism? Yeah. So there has to be an answer somewhere if you're killing people. So now, because democracy was coming and there had always like been like activities like this where people actually sort of you would kill ram, you would kill goat, you spill it at
Hmm.
the altar and all of that. But there needed to be like a stronger bond between the god and the human, right? So there was like a crazy demand for very specific kinds of blood. Pregnant women, children, virgins. And we would find this scattered around our own history and our own like laws and stories. If, in fact, even when the king dies, unfortunately, it was documented in the King's Horsemen, Death and the King's Horsemen, that when the king even dies, there are people who are called the Ababakus who actually are buried with the king. So there's at every point in history, there's always a demand for blood. At that time in the history of Nigeria, the demand for blood was actually very transactional because people needed power, and then in exchange for that, gods that they went in search of were asking for very specific demands like this. So a lot of my friends were missing. A lot of my friends were killed. Their heads were severed, their bodies, their chests, all of these things. And it wasn't actually like happening in a vacuum. It was because in 1999, there would be an election and people would be enthroned as presidents, as leaders. And we've sort of like, and you would imagine that there was this rise again pre 2023 when people were really getting missing every day on
Yes.
Twitter in 2022, every single day on Twitter, there's somebody who's missing. Every single day. You can literally go back and more recently, between 2018, 2019, since Buhari became president, and today, there's like a crazy rise in the way that supposed Yahoo boys are actually also like using like they're caught for possessing like human score, this, that. You have to chase it logically through like a reason map to actually see
Mm.
what exactly is happening. There's a demand somewhere, there's a killing elsewhere, there's an absence, and to what end? Power, money, what's going to happen next year? So, I mean, I think that it's impossible to talk about ritual killings and the killings that happen across Nigeria without actually like situating it in the way that Nigerian democracy has always worked, right? In the way that we sort of like, would think about leadership and the way that people actually like hold on to power. I'll just stop there.
Because one of the books I read recently treated this topic about how, like, if you want to get power, basically in the current human system, you have to deal in
Mhm.
death. So essentially, the business of power is the business of dealing with the dead. It's an Alama
Right.
Baku novel. It was very insightful in that aspect. Oh wow! Back into the boyhood. Let's enter into the boyhood because because at least that's one thing on this novel. Even though it was so dark, I could see that innocence of boyhood. It was
Yeah.
mad with reality. And of course, we're still going to talk about, still the dark mad part because I mean, there's no running away from all of the years of blood in these
Yeah.
years of blood, essentially. And I think
Right.
this is where, like, I think my current poem that is my favorite there is Boys Who Never Die after Safia El Hilo. And I remember in that poem, we get to a point where we are calling all of these boys' names. Because I found the bounce there boys who dance around plastic chairs in front of barbers' shops to win a free haircut, boys who gaze at the moon and fabricate a story about the man who left his mother and turned into a moon man, boys who love their mothers and run after cows on Ogunleye streets. When ice cream melts and slings down the arm, the boys lick their arms. Corn boys, yam boys, boys who never joke with food. And it's like, so you get that innocence of boyhood. Like I did all of these things. I ran after cows. I live in the north. If I didn't run after cow, did I grow up here? And
Yeah.
then after that, we now start to go on a lot of names about boys who probably never came home. And I wanted to hear these boys' stories if you tell them, just some of them as much as you can tell. Sorry to drag you into that dark past, but I think these
Yeah.
boys,
Yeah.
their stories
Yeah.
need to be heard. So, like, there's a whole
Yeah.
laundry list of them. I didn't copy it, but
So some of them are still alive, and then I also like inserted a couple names that are no longer with us. Taufik, for instance, and Michael Shotimbo, and Michael Shotimbo's last name is like the only last name that I've carried through the years. Like because we used to like joke with Michael then, we'll call him Shotimwa, Shotimbo, Shotimwa, Shotimbo. So realizing that Michael is no longer with us, just kind of like the lyric of the music that we used to like, shooting, which means both means is it coming, is it coming? Like shooting
yeah,
means is it coming, which means it's so poetic that is never gonna come. But when he was alive and we were like friends, he was just shooting. I grew up with many of these boys, many of them who are like still my friends today, many of them who we still hang out when we're like both in Nigeria. So many of them whose story I'm like, infinitely telling and I'm going to continue to tell. I needed to also, as much as I'm like eulogizing the dead, I needed to also eulogize living because we've all been through this together. I needed an opportunity to actually like say thank you to my friends and not just like be fixated on friends who are dead, but also like friends whose story actually shapes the entirety of this writer. Even if they're like silent in the book, they're like evident everywhere in the book because we played ball together. We fell in love with the same girls. We hated each other because of the same girls. My friends were queer, realizing that they're queer and then coming out to me. And my friends have been coming out to me since as early as like 10, 11. And I've like always like been that guy who's like, keeping just the food, like keeping the secret for multiple friends. And then when they started to come out to each other, watching them blossom in love, and I'm like, you know. So this poem and then that archive, that name is like me keeping them safe in the book, in some way, just for reference. So maybe one day when we all die, there would be, and somebody actually picks this up, they would know that these people actually like lived the names. And then it's also very incantatory in the way that the names actually arise to me. Like I'm like invoking their heads, like calling them to come help me complete this poem at the read. It's just bringing them into the room. It's my favorite poem from the book too. It's so unlike me, very different from what I would naturally write. So when I wrote this, I wept for weeks. I was just like, yeah. So yeah. I'm like all
uh,
in my feelings now. So
I'm so sorry.
yeah. No, no, no. Don't be sorry. It's fine. So thank you.
No, it's a beautiful poem. I could go. It's something that I hope that whenever you are in Nigeria, you have a reading. I hope you perform. I would really like to hear you read that poem with all of the emotions because, like, it's like when I bookmarked it. When I was sorry from the beginning. I was like, I can't wait to get back there so that I can read it again. Like, I was even just writing it out for my like script. I could not help like just following like how where you stop and then you press enter. I was like, nah, I can't even make mistake. I can't make mistake because it's so delicate and it's so tender. That's why I said, I say if you ever write prose, I'm there because I know that I'm in for like some
Mm,
good music. Poetry folds a lot of things inside language that prose can't. Prose will have to follow a structure, if but the last question still about like that this darkness. I think there was a line that really jumped at me. I think was it in the second or third poem. A machete cutting deep through the bones of a child is someone's prayer. Like I think that just
yeah,
encapsulates like that desperation in
yeah,
the whole ritual killings. And then it also did say something about religions because over here up in the north, my mother was
yeah.
killed with a machete cutting through her bones, and all
God.
of that. Even down with most of like the religious killings that we have is. I think I was having the conversation with Abu Bakar Adam Ibrahim, and he was like, "Yeah, they'll say Allah Akbar, they're hacking you, or Jesus is Lord." Honestly, they injust here, and I was like, did you ever want to have a discussion about like religion and the Nigerian psyche while like writing this book? Was it something that was there while you were thinking?
This is a very interesting question. So my friend actually sent me like a screenshot of a good read review of a white person who's like commenting on this book. And the person was commenting to say that, oh, because I talked about like my grandfather or somebody going to masjid, then I must be Muslim, I must be part of the Muslim people who are like killing Christians in Nigeria. So therefore this book is 2 stars, you know. And I'm like, hmm. I wish you knew that I grew up Muslim. I then eventually became a Christian because my mom started going to church. But my grandfather was an herbalist, technically. So I literally have like in my lifetime practiced all of this. I grew up in a community where religious syncretism is like the order of the day. We're like very, very fluid in the way that we practice and then in the way that we believe that the God is one and across multiple religions. So there is no way that you'd be writing from Nigeria and then your work would not actually have that religious backdrop. It is acutely aware wherever you're coming from. If you grew up in the East, or in the Southeast, because it is predominantly like Christian and Catholic, your writing would in some way oust Christianity unintentionally as an ideology. And in the same way, when you're writing about machete entering into people's, you're literally ousting unintentionally all of the grief that is actually rooted in religion or religious beliefs that actually sort of like cut across like a people. So we're like
Mm.
folding multiple things together. That particular poem is very specific to the use case. Oh God, Adedayo. It's very specific to the situation. I just said use case, and I'm like, that's so. So it's very specific to the situation that I was writing about, which is like at the point where this beheading is happening. I don't know if you've just like recently seen the story of the Oyo teacher who was beheaded like a couple of
Mm.
days ago. And I
Mm.
have refused to like watch the video because I just cannot. It would make me more angry, and then I'll go on like several multiple breakdowns on Twitter. I'm breaking character as a
Yeah.
poet that I've always known, and I don't like that. But it is what is required right now, actually, I think. Anyways, so Machete is a very ruthless character in our story as Nigerians. In itself, a character, it's like an entity, and it has its own hand, has its own face. A machete is a living thing when we talk about violence in Nigeria. What would change the story of the machete is in whose hand it is. So whether the hand that is a kidnapper's hand with no intention to actually use his body for rituals, but technically, what happens to the body that's now severed, and that's where we open the whole conversation of the human body black market, which is a different conversation entirely, which is well and alive in Nigeria. And then we open the conversation about whether it's actually like in the hand of a religious extremist or a terrorist, or we open or a man actually finds his wife actually cheating and then finds the man who she's cheating with, and then the man goes with the machete into the head of the woman and splits it. That's a different story entirely. So technically, the machete in itself is a character, but in whose hand it is at the time when the story is being told or the story is unfolding is how the story changes. So I don't think the machete in Niger machete is a singular entity. I think it's like multiple entities. And that's how I think about it. And that's how I think about religion too, especially as a writer who has like, like been exposed to all of these three things, all of these three major religion. I think that I don't exist in a vacuum. I exist in multiple vacuums at the same time. I'm Christian. I literally read the Quran and the Surah. I know that before my grandfather died, he has made several, ablutions on my behalf. He has made several prayers to his gods on my behalf. And then my grandfather, who I'm still talking about, was like also, although he had multiple altars, was also like a very well-ranked Islamic cleric, in Ijebu, where he grew up. So technically, they would come. They know that he's literally like Jagumolu of his community, but they will still come on Friday with an entourage to actually carry him to the mosque to pray. So having all of this awareness, it's impossible for me to say, oh, I hate Islam so much, or oh my God, traditional worshiping is evil. Although all of these systems have shown me the extreme of the concept of belief. However, what I experienced growing up, and I still continue to experience, the people who I have met as I exist in these communities. Religion is a centerpiece in my work. I literally always think about religion, although now I have like several, I've always had questions about it. But I didn't write the machete line to oust directly. It was very specific to the use case, although I know that it's actually very also relevant to literally everything that is Nigerian violence.
Wow, the machete, a centerpiece of Nigerian violence. Well, that's a beautiful way to put it. Because no, that I think that's a line that should be all time with the one who's in front of the gun, at least forever. Because I think to the American society is the gun, but in Nigerian society it's kind of
Yeah.
like the machete. It's kind of like our
Yes.
main kidney for violence.
Yeah. I
Wow.
mean, Kenny. Yeah.
Now diving back into you on Twitter because you said that your image and I'm like no I think in the late 80s to the 90s before like that first Japa season that carried all of our artists around they were the ones that were actually on the front lines of the protests. So Like if I see a writer that is writing book and he's in front of the line, like give us better good governance, I'll be like, okay, yes, that's how it's supposed to be. Because at some point after reading the Years of Blood, I sat down, I thought of it like throughout last week. I was like, is poetry going to become has poetry really become an effective way to speak to the Nigerian spirit? Because I know I mentioned at the beginning of this chat that our our prose is okay, our prose is great, but we found a way to escape with the prose a little bit. There's no poem I have ever read that did not sort of like reveal the spirit of the age, even if the person is just playing. Poetry will bring out the word, the things that you think inside. What do you think about what poetry can do for like the Nigerian spirit? Do you still think it can wake us up?
We're very far away from that, to be honest. Very, very far away from it. That's the truth. And I guess this is why people would literally like, immediately land with me being just side questing and just doing things that I naturally just do like casually. And then that being like the thing where people would say, "Oh, you're literally like a hero. Oh my God. Like, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh my God, you're rattling whatever." And I'm like, I've been rattling since 2013. I literally like wrote, I started writing in 2013, like officially, like in 2013. But at the end of 2013 slash 2022, I literally like curated like an anthology of all of us wannabe writers called the Epistle of Lies. That literally like just was just we're all just writing about politics and politicians and deaths that were happening in the north because at that time the concept of death in the south was still like an idea that we were like really, really like for it was foreign to us. Now it has come home, But as at 2013, we were already like curating that experience. We were literally like curating writing poetry. But I've also like realized that the reason why education is underfunded is technically because of days like this when it would be so hard to liberate people that are not exactly very, very educated. Now I'm saying that from a privileged point of view. Western education is not the only kind of education. But because we exist technically on the node of the English language, it's very hard for people to comprehend. And then also, we're like so poor that we have no time to sit and read a poem as a people. So the only language that people understand now is the language of like, now it's impossible for you to physically protest. Technically, it is impossible for you to physically protest. So the only way that we can actually also like protest is like, innovating ways with which we can like remind people that nothing about Nigeria is going on fine. Nothing is okay right now. People are like stealing money, but people are also sort of like, behind the reason why people are dead today. Like several things that you just find data, random data, and you're like, this thing has always been on the internet. This thing is
Hmm.
like so now I'm just like helping people like put together all of these things that are like, found everywhere in like public archives and DOJ, like Department of Justice has so much on Nigeria. So much on like, like it's crazy. And then just following like the daily transactions from Nigeria, from the federal government, their daily transactions. If you follow that, see your anger will just shoot from year to year. Like, oh, you just realize that, my God, like companies that are 2 days old, 2 days old are like receiving about like 500 million, blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, but it's impossible to like just come and say that without putting together something that people can understand. So right now,
Hmm.
I think poetry would literally like, get poets angry. You'd read poems and then you'd be like, yeah, I know this, but yes, this thing is so getting me angry. I'm so angry. However, for the larger population, I think
Hmm.
again, we've not gotten there where poetry is like the tool. Poetry would be really, it would, but we would get there. We will. But
Hmm.
we're also not radicalized enough to the point where poetry then becomes something that we turn to and or poets actually become the voices that we like, return to. But I've always returned to Nia Shundare's not my business. Yes. Nia Shundare is not my business
Yeah.
because it's always always instrumental, always instrumental, very, very instrumental. That's my 2 cents.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I know. I think that really clears things up for me. Okay, so yeah, we talked about Professor Oshundari and going back to his poetry, and I'm like, I'm still wondering what other poets. I like Africans because I'm bringing. We hope our literature comes back to the center. So if we're to write poets that I want to say poets that write like you, yeah, contemporary and
Okay.
others that have that strength of language. I'm looking for like how like they capture these things without like sugarcoating them. They are not unafraid that are unafraid of what the readership thinks, and they are like, okay, this is what this poem is telling me, and this is what I want to put out into the world. Let's talk about it. What are those the poets that you've come across through your fellowship, through like your time at Iowa, and through your
Yeah.
practice?
My first couple is just going to be my friends, to be honest. So when we're talking about the strength of language, we're talking about Patrick. Nome Patrick is,
Norman
yeah,
Patrick. Hmm.
yeah. Like, yeah, Nome Patrick's language is impeccable. I think it's one of those. Is one of those writers that writes and then I go, yeah, such an idiot. Look at this guy. Look at this dude. No, yeah, like I'm in awe of his writing. And to follow that up is like back in Jeremiah. This again, these are my friends.
Hmm.
Jeremiah, I think Jeremiah is one of those poets that I think deserves like so much attention. He's one of the most brilliant people I know that I have in my life. Is literally like is so brilliant. I just cannot continue to like emphasize. I cannot overemphasize. It cannot be overemphasized. Like talking about him and his writing and his brilliance cannot. It's something that we should sit down as a community to do. Like we should talk about Jeremiah Agbakin just because he's
Hmm.
that good. Moving from there, we'll have Wale Anila, Michael Akuche, Pamela Jacob, Kolawole when he used to write poetry. Kolawole Adebayo. These are my friends. Going outside of that, there's a writer whose book just came out. Who's called Atria. His name is Dan Waldman, DS
Mm-hmm.
Waldman. Dan's writing is impeccable. Dan Waldman's writing
Mm.
is crazy. I feel like I have so many names, but I like they're like escaping me right now. I'm already like thinking about Kavakanem and the host of writers that I know from Kavakanem whose writing I am in awe of. And names are not coming to me now, but I'm seeing their faces. Like I'm literally like seeing their
Mm.
faces. But the names are not coming to me. So maybe I can send you a list after now. But I would forever be grateful to Savio Gbadamosi's work, Gbenga Adesina's work, Dami Ajayi's work,
Mm.
because
Mm.
all of those writers actually like, in some way helped to shape the possibility of what poetry can look like. I would eventually go out and branch
Mm.
out and decide that this is how I want to write my own poems. They showed many of us like, oh, so when you talk about poetry, this is what you mean. This is what you're trying to say.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
before I forget, I think that another book, and I think that you should actually invite him, is Salah Olajide. He wrote a book called Contraband Bodies.
I've heard of that book everywhere. Everywhere.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, fine.
So
Okay.
Contraband Bodies is a fucking brilliant book, and you would pardon my French. It's a fucking brilliant book, and I am grateful because I mean I'm just lucky that I happen to be his younger brother. Like in that way, I was part of the first people that saw like when the book was developing, when it became a
Mm.
first draft. I in the same way that he also saw when the Years of Blood was developing, and then when it became a first draft. So I
Mm.
feel lucky that we both published our books in the same year, both outside Nigeria, and published our books in the
Mm.
same year in Nigeria because his book came out from
Mm.
Narrative Press, mine came out from
That's
Masobe.
okay.
It's
Yes.
just, but yeah, like Contraband Bodies actually like collects the idea of migration, connects that to living in
Mm.
Nigeria, what it means to actually like be that boy, whether you're like, and it also sort of like deals in its way on boyhood, whether or not you're legal outside the country, the ecology and the landscape actually treats you as contraband, as though you're you're not supposed to be here, as though it's a crime that
Mm.
you arrived here. But the other crazy thing is then that when you go back home, you're also like contrabanded, in some way, because first we have to think about the idea of returning, and then the conversation that we have on Twitter right now, where they've ousted like writers who are writing from outside the country as though we're like not Nigerians. And then there's that point where you begin to think about, oh, so technically there's a gun on my back, or even for people who have never left Nigeria, we're living literally in Nigeria as though we're like contraband. And look at the communal clashes that we
Mm.
have today. Look at the way that we
Mm.
interact. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, that book is a book that deserves all the freaking attention that it should get. It's a really good book. I literally just bought like about 10 copies for people just because I need more people to read the book. It's so good. Yeah, it's really, really good.
Hey, I shall add it to my next haul. I shall thank you
Yes,
so
please, please,
much.
please,
Thank you
please,
so
please.
much.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
which leads me to my last question, which is what would you like to add to the Nigerian poetry scene and the faculty? Like if if you had your area, like yeah, let's do this.
Feel like students in Nigeria are like literally out. They've taken poetry out of what is possible for them. Like I mean literature
Mm,
students. And I think a good way to actually like, return that back is actually like reading people who are people they can relate with, people they can find on Twitter, people they can find on Facebook, like
mm,
people who are doing incredible work. Look at Romeo, look at the work that Romeo has done. Look at who else? Like there are several people whose work like Nigerians can literally like read, relate to, that can actually even like expand the conversation that we have about poetry. So I think if I have my way, if I become the Minister of Education today like this, the first thing I'm going to do is first of all scratch jump. The second is I'm going to now review like our freaking like from the top to the bottom our syllabus. I think that our syllabus is
yeah.
shit. I think that the love for education is gone. A lot of things. But that being said, I think that we need to fund literature more. I am doing my
Yeah.
bits right now. My team and I, in the name of my grandfather, we're like giving, we started a prize called the Adedayo Agarau prize, which is like
Yeah.
$2,000 prize. Right now, might be 1,000 next year, because right now we got an extra funding of 1K. So it's $2,000 prize, and it's actually like toward 10 sheets of poems for first. One is focused on an African writer living on the continent, and then the other is focused on like African writers, like black writers generally. So whether you're like from the
Mm,
Caribbean or you're from UK, wherever it is, as long as you're black, you can submit to the prize. So again, we have the Unserious Collective. My friends and I at the Unserious Collective, we're like doing a fellowship, and then we give like, we support 4 Nigerian poets every year, like with about 150K to just like support their writing, and then we give them like informal mentorship and all of that. So there are several
mm.
things that money can do for our community if they are not looting us so dry in this country. You see why it comes back to good governance, why it's very important that writers actually like, I never get writers who are like just freaking silent and just like, I'm hiding my head. Why are you a writer if you're trying to hide the head?
No, I mean, you're doing great work because I mean, writers have always sort of been like the conscience of a nation. I think in Tenochris, A Time for New Dreams, he says a nation that abandons his writers and abandons his conscience will not find the literature. Let literature come to Twitter and come and find us. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
all of that.
See, this has
So,
been a really chill conversation. So grateful. Yeah.
like I said, I'm a fan of your work, and like when I saw that 1,000 Reasons too, I was like, that's an art form right there. Okay, because that's like 3 years worth of anger. If I had to remember a
Yeah.
flashcard every day, so like it's
Yeah.
really beautiful work, and thank you so much for what you do, and thank you so much for coming to the pod. I hope that you had fun. I
Yeah.
hope
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
feel a little lighter, and we're able to like at least intellectually disturb you a bit because that's what we came here for. Thank you so much.
Hey, I'm so grateful. Thank you so
Uh,
much for this.
all
This
right,
is what I
man.
enjoy doing actually. So yeah,
Oh.
sure.
We look forward to your next book as you have pushed it to 2029 for us. We will wait. We will wait for that. No
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
No
Yeah. Yeah.
problem
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
all.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. So you have a
All
great
right.
day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye
Yeah.
bye.
Bye.